I'm Matt Wilhelmi, and I'm the owner of Strategic Voyages Business Consultants. I'm also the author of Taboo Business Questions, What's Haunting Every Entrepreneur's Growth. And today, I'm joined by Lindsay Britt. She is a fractional CMO. She also has her MBA from Duke University, specializing in marketing. She works with companies, typically with the supply chain and SaaS side of the world, as well as marketplaces, which is actually the case study that we've been unpacking today. In our first episode, we talked about some different issues that a finance company in Florida has. And so in this episode, Lindsay's kind enough to kind of peel the curtain back a little bit and share some of the magic that goes into solving these issues. And so, Lindsay, thank you again for joining me today. I was wondering if maybe you could bring us into these three issues a little bit, and I can summarize them if you'd like. But basically, do you see these a lot? Are they totally crazy? Like, do a lot of other businesses have these three issues?
So I'm really excited for this episode. By the way, I've been looking forward to this one the most. And no, none of them are unique. I'd say every business kind of has unique approaches and challenges that are slightly different, but the issues themselves are very common.
Yeah, and so just to kind of clarify for the audience, if they're tuning into this episode, the three issues that this finance company was dealing with was they didn't really have a clearly defined kind of target audience, or in the marketing world, that's called an ICP, an ideal client profile. And so there's obviously some issues that happen when you don't have that clearly defined, which we'll get into how to solve that here in just a second. But the second issue was that they have a lack of a process, right? And so a lot of times in smaller organizations in their startup phase, kind of before they get like super serious, the founder's doing a lot of the sales. And that was exactly what was happening in this organization. And unfortunately, what that means sometimes is there isn't really a clear marketing plan or a strategy. It's just kind of, pick up your phone and call some people and see if you can make some magic happen, which probably makes you a little anxious. It makes me anxious as the CFO. But I'm curious, Lindsay, like if you could bring us into the solutions, what are you going to help them with? How would you go about it? What would you recommend?
Yeah, absolutely. So starting off with the ICP, one of the things you said was that they think they know who the ICP is, but they probably don't. And they need to be going after, I believe, more mid-market accounts. So that in and of itself is a challenge to help the leadership team really understand or open their eyes to a lack of understanding or needing to better define the ICP. So going through, I typically go through some sort of process where we say, okay, here's who you're currently targeting. Here is the problem that your current product is trying to solve. Are these people the actual ones that have that problem? And it sounds like they aren't really the ones who have the problem, or it's not really offering to help them. So really going through that process with them to say, okay, let's take half a day or however long it may take to bring a select group of people into the room to really discuss what the value is that this product is or service is providing. So in this case, they are trying to really connect these corporate partners with people who want to be, who they can lend their money to, right? My understanding is they're giving those corporate partners access to more customers. And so if that's really the problem, the ICP that they're currently going after, are they having trouble finding those other smaller customers to lend money to? And if not, you're not really providing value. So if it's the mid-market size companies who need access to more customers or more channels to lend money, that's the value you're providing. So those are the people that you should be going after and targeting and defining as your ICP. So making sure that that's understood and agreed upon really early on, because if not everyone agrees, that can be a challenge in and of itself.
Yeah, and so with this company, again, it's a finance company in Florida. You've used the term marketplace because they do have kind of the supply side of their business, and then they have the demand side of their business. And we've been focusing on the supply side because they don't really have it clearly defined. I think when I was talking to them very briefly about their valuation, they kind of said, yeah, we get, these funds from some of our corporate partners. It's really just kind of anybody that wants to write a 7 or 8 figure check. That's a good client for us. It's like, okay, well, that doesn't really narrow it down much. That's not very clear, right? Like that's not going to work for a marketing strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. You need to have, so one of the things that we're talking about later in terms of problems to solve is having some sort of marketing channel, or at least a marketing strategy. And if the growth so far is really just the current network of the executives and the CEO, especially, or the founder, especially, that's great in the beginning, but that isn't a way to really scale the company to where they may want to go. And so having a really clear understanding of, okay, they may have 7 or 8 figures that they can loan, but what do they actually look like, will help people to target other customers where it's not necessarily driven by that smaller executive team or the small network that may eventually dry up.
Yeah, so that sounds like more of a you've identified kind of the ICP. You've gone through this process, which I love the word process. You come up with like a ideal client profile, and then now it's okay. Well, what's their issues? What are they dealing with? What are their goals? And so you're able to kind of psychologically kind of get into the mindset of those ICPs, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it just, you want to be able to talk their language.
And that kind of helps define the strategy, right? When you're developing these marketing ideas, it's not just throwing darts at a dartboard anymore. Now we've got a specific person, a specific issue, or a specific need, and we're able to really kind of speak to that more. And so it sounds like your strategy or your solution rather encompasses a very detailed strategy, right?
Yeah. And that's why we started with the ICP too, because you can't figure out what the messaging or positioning is until you know who you're actually targeting and what their problems are.
And so when you're walking a client through kind of this process, right, you've identified some issues. In this case, we've got 3 very clearly defined ones, and you go through this half day, or maybe that's not in every situation, but like if they need help with their ICP, you've got a process for that. You develop the strategy. What are some of the elements of that strategy? I would guess that there's probably like milestones or KPIs. I think you used to use the term OKRs. But what is how do you kind of build that strategy?
You mean with the ICP development, or
with the overall marketing strategy that's going to
Got
kind
it.
of solve this problem? Like, are you, I would imagine that when you're, coming into an organization as an executive, the CEOs or the board of directors, whoever it is that you're talking to, they're going to want to kind of understand, not only what your process is, but how are we going to know it's working?
Yeah, I mean, when I'm starting the strategy, first and foremost, I want to understand what the revenue goals are for the company, and then work my way backward. And then, so that's why it was important. And one of the second problems that we said is, what are the OKRs for whomever is selling? So in order to come up with kind of the marketing budget and what the goals are for marketing, I need to understand what does sales need to attain? What are their goals? And how does that contribute to the revenue number? Because not all of the revenue number, hopefully, is coming from only new customers. It could be from old customers that we already know. Now, I know in this business that there's not really recurring revenue as much. So you may need to bring in a lot of new customers, but hopefully you could get a couple who reinvest the next year or so. Or you have people who are just kind of inbound, or people who the executives already know. But for that strategy, it boils down to starting off with that revenue number, understanding, okay, what does the conversion rate need to be for the sales team, and working your way down through the funnel and the pipeline of what are the conversion rates at every stage of the funnel and every stage to help us reach that revenue goal. And then having a really transparent conversation with the CEO, the CFO, either the CRO or the head of sales, whomever it may be, to say, here, given the budget that we have outlined right now, this is the goal that we're going to attain. So if it's not the revenue goal that we need, here are the different parts of the funnel that need to be tweaked or optimized to be able to reach that number. And what that looks like can vary greatly, whether it's top of funnel, where you need to do more demand gen and bring in more to the funnel, whether it's lead generation, where you're actually getting better conversions, is that where you need to be optimizing? And that's a little bit challenging at this client because they haven't done marketing yet. But if you know that early on, you have an idea of what your goal needs to be at each stage of the funnel. And at least you're having something you're measuring against in the very beginning to see if you're being successful or not.
Yeah, when I think about marketing, Lindsay, I think of it as a process where you can measure each step, which you just said, and a process that's so clearly defined that you can just add more money to the top of the funnel and the output's very similar because the conversion rates are the same, the click-through rates are the same, all of these different metrics that you just described aren't going to change when you just add more money. And then when you do add more money, guess what? Things work really great in the business if it's clearly defined. And so that warms my heart as a CFO, to kind of know that.
I will say that oversimplifies it a little bit because the conversion rate can vary by channel. And so you have an overall conversion rate. And going back to our last episode too, where you want to set aside 10 to 20% of the budget to test, you don't always know what the conversion rate's going to be. And I will say too, like going back to when I was leading marketing for Clove and Hallow, which was more of an e-com business. And on the D2C, that was a clean beauty company. I mean, in the early days with Facebook marketing, and you could just you knew what your conversion rates were going to be. The more money you put in, the more new customers you got. You could fill the top of the funnel. And then everything changed when the cookie settings changed and COVID hit, and it's nothing like that anymore. And so I would never be comfortable saying just add more money at the top of the funnel because you know what your conversion rates are going to be because everything changes constantly. And I wish it was that predictable.
Okay. So I was a little bit reductive. I didn't mean to be offensive. I
No,
guess what I was
not at
saying
all.
was it's exciting to hear that there's this ability to kind of understand and quantify each step of the process. And so it's even more encouraging to hear that there's a CMO out there who's like, wait a minute, don't give me a blank check just yet. Like we don't want to do that because you don't want to, obviously take a lot of money and pour it into the top of the funnel. And then the output's like really off.
Yeah.
That's going to make you look terrible, I'm sure. And so, in an organization like this finance one that we've been talking about, perhaps it's a little bit of a different approach because it's not necessarily a clearly defined funnel yet, but that's what you'd want to help them create, right?
Yes, absolutely. And that's why it would be really interesting to see those 6 executives or so who are the partners, who are the ones that are bringing in new business right now. What is their process and how are they measuring their success? And is one partner doing better than others? If so, what are they doing? I mean, I wouldn't want to come in and change everything right away. I'd want to understand what the current process looks like. And whenever you have kind of founder-led sales, you really want to, you don't want to quickly change from that. You really want to do it incrementally and only do it at the point where you really need to. If it's being really successful and the founder enjoys doing that and they can continue to scale it in some way, there's no reason to necessarily change that. But as the company scales, figuring out how you can really incrementally shift it so the founder is a little bit more removed from the process and scale it is important. So when you want to start measuring early with the other partners who are helping. So it's not just one day where you wake up and say, oh no, our pipeline's completely dried up. The founder can't scale anymore. And you already have an understanding of what needs to be done and how you're measuring it early on.
Yeah, it sounds like this company could have really used your help because you come at it with such a strategic approach. You talked about identifying their issues. Obviously we walked through some of those questions in our first episode, and that kind of allowed you to really crystallize what their top 3 issues are, right? And so just to kind of recap, the first one was kind of they didn't have a clearly defined ideal client profile. It wasn't obvious. It wasn't, really well thought out. The second one was a lack of a process, like you mentioned. The founder was kind of doing a lot of the sales, and you've seen that before. This is not, a unique issue. But the third one, not really having a true marketing strategy, I would guess that happens often as well. Somebody, maybe you come into an organization and, there's somebody that does like social media, and maybe there's somebody that manages like a newsletter campaign, but it's not really cohesive throughout the organization. They're almost like playing instruments, but like they're not even playing the same song. And so my analogy here is that you would kind of come in as the conductor who's also played all of these instruments and can kind of get everybody in tune and on the same page, kind of, playing the music from the same sheet, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd say one of the biggest challenges too as a marketer, I'm frequently the first marketing hire, even before I did Fractional. And it's really hard when a company waits until they desperately need leads to grow, or the business is going to fail, and they say, oh, now we need marketing. Because there are certain things you can do to get quick leads, but they're often not quality leads, and that's not always the case, but it's really hard to get the quality leads that you want to convert quickly, at least right off the bat. Now, certainly there are sometimes low-hanging fruit that you can do at first, but the demand gen side of the business and demand creation takes time. And especially if it's going to be sustainable and it's going to bring in the quality leads that you want. And there's this amazing metric that I really love where they say, okay, you have out of your ICP, 95% of them aren't ready to buy. Only 5% of them are ready to buy. And so you have to be top of mind for those 95% when they transition over to that 5% is ready to buy. And so doing that is building brand awareness and awareness of what the problems are that you're trying to solve, and creating content or a community that's helping them and adding value to them even before they're ready to buy. So when they are at that point, they're ready to say, oh yes, I want to go for XY company. And that takes time. And so it's really hard when marketing isn't brought in earlier to be able to turn around and bring that value to the company quickly, which I know no executive likes to hear, especially ones who are saying, I need to grow now. But I wish people would bring in marketing earlier to help kind of avoid that trouble.
Yeah, I mean, that's unfortunately, I've seen that too. Where a company's, financials aren't maybe going in the right direction, and well, I don't know if I have, money to invest in marketing, or I don't know if I want to do it yet, and then they wait too long, right?
Mm-hmm.
But some of those sales cycles take a while to work, and that's if they're working correctly. You can wait, but being top of mind for that key percentage of those 95, I think you mentioned, percent of ideal clients, whenever they are ready, is tough because you don't know how long it's going to be, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it takes investment, and there are ways to do it in not super costly ways. Obviously, even just writing blog content and having some sort of content marketing plan. But sometimes you have to invest in events or getting your name out that way. Not always. There are certainly pros and cons to doing that way too. But yeah, there are different ways to do that, to be top of mind, but it takes time.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking like there's even probably a different strategy with targeting different clients that maybe are making these buying decisions every day versus once in a year decisions versus I don't know, I have this need and you're telling me that I have this need. Okay, now it's making like there's different strategies for these different profiles. And so it would be great, to hire somebody like yourself that understands these different personas and these different buying habits and these different situations where it's a different strategy, right? You mentioned blogs. I think you've mentioned, or maybe I mentioned pay-per-click, but there's different strategies and they're not all going to work every time. You have to kind of understand this issue or this situation needs this one. And over here, we're going to need this one. And so I'm just really grateful for your time, Lindsay. You've been such an inspirational guest, very articulate, but I think, all of that aside, being able to correctly and quickly diagnose the issues in an organization, followed up with the right tool to solve the problem, is just like such a breath of fresh air. So I really appreciate your time today on our episodes. Again, I'm here with Lindsay Britt. She is a Fractional CMO. The name of your company is the Rocket CMO, right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. And so, Lindsay, you've been doing this for a while. You've been, very successful in growing your own company. And I'm just really, like I said, grateful that you've spent a little bit of time with me today, recording these episodes and giving the audience kind of a flavor for what you would bring to the table if they were to want to hire you. So thank you very much for your time.